What's up? How you doing? Today we're talking about the biological buffer systems. Now, you've heard of buffers before, and these are solutions that resist changes to pH when an acid or a base is added. And in general chemistry, we learned how to calculate the pH and all that stuff, but what if I told you that the buffers are keeping you alive right now? That's right. We have a bunch of biological buffer systems in our bodies, in our blood, in our cells and kidneys to keep us alive. And they do what buffers do. They keep our body's pH at a very specific number, and it's usually about 7.4, and the body's pH goes between 7.35 and 7.45, and you don't want to go outside that. We don't want to be too acidic and too basic. And as you know from calculating pH is an algorithmic scale, meaning that if you have a difference of pH 1, it means that H plus ions are 10 times more. So a seemingly small difference in pH is a big difference in concentration. So we really, really need to keep our pH in at a certain range that's very narrow and very specific, and these buffers do a really good job. And we have three main buffers. We have the carbonic buffer system, the carbonic acid buffer system, the phosphate buffer system, and then we have the protein buffer systems. And we're going to look at these today, but it's just going to be an overview. We're not going to go too specific into reactions. But by the end of this video, you should know more about these buffer systems. So let's start with the carbonic acid buffer system. Just like the name says, carbonic acid buffer system uses carbonic acid as the weak acid. Remember that each buffer has to have a weak acid and its conjugate base. So this conjugate base is the carbonate ion, right? So you have the carbonic acid, and where does carbonic acid come from? Well, CO2, right? CO2 goes here, right? Binds to H2O, and you have H2CO3, the carbonic acid, right? And as you know that, CO2 is produced during respiration, and it needs to be moved throughout the blood. So we talk a lot about moving oxygen using hemoglobin and things like that, but people don't talk much about how CO2 is moved. Well, it's moved through the carbonic acid buffer system, right? And look at this. We have the carbonate ion, but we also have the H plus ion. And the H plus ion is important because, well, this is what changes the pH, right? So this H plus ion has to be regulated. So just like any other reversible systems, depending on the conditions that we have in the body, the reaction will either go this way or that way, right? It will go forward or reverse based on the conditions that we have. So if we look at, for example, what happens here, right? We have the CO2, right? CO2 goes from the cells into the blood cell, right? Into the red blood cells. And whenever it gets into the red blood cells to be carried away, it's going to be carried in acidic form, right? And then it can give H plus. Now, again, going back to the bigger picture, there are three things involved that we need to remember. We have lungs, we have the blood, and then we have the kidneys, right? So as you can see, HCO3 negative can be, if you have too much of it, we can get rid of it through the kidneys, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you can get rid of it through the kidneys, but you can also get rid of it by going this way, right? Producing the reaction this way. So something really cool happens in this system. And I think I like to ask a question like this to my students, but hyperventilation has to do with this system. If your pH in your body or your blood is wrong, your body can hyperventilate. And what happens when it hyperventilates? It takes out the CO2. And when we take out a lot of CO2, that means that you are removing the H plus ions. So if you have too many H pluses, and by the way, pay attention to this. If you have too many H plus ions, your pH is going to be too low, right? If you have too many H plus ions, your pH is going to be too low, too acidic. And then if you hyperventilate, the H plus ions are going to be turned into carbonic acid. So you're changing the equilibrium by hyperventilating. And then your pH will go up, right? Your pH will go up because you're going to remove the number of H plus ions, which is really cool, just by hyperventilating. And it works the other way as well. If your blood is too acidic, calming down and just stopping and breathing slowly so that you reduce the output of CO2 is going to change this reaction and make it go the other way. It's going to make it go forward so that we can make more H plus. It's very incredible. This is just really cool how you can do that. You can just change the equilibrium of your carbonic acid buffer system by just breathing very, very fast. But going back to the kidneys, right? If we go into the kidneys, again, the kidneys also take in the carbonic acid, right? They can also take in the H plus, but this takes me to the phosphate buffer system. The phosphate buffer system happens in the kidneys. And what it does is, I want you to pay attention to this one here. This is the one, right? So this is the system in the urine, and look at what it's doing. It's taking in the extra H plus. It's taking in the extra H plus. So if you have extra H plus, it can be taken up by the phosphate buffer system in the kidneys, and it can be excreted as urine. So this right here is another system, the phosphate buffer system. Another really cool thing happens inside the kidneys is that in addition to getting to receiving the carbonic acid when you have too much of it, it also produces carbonic acid when you have too little of it, right? So let me see. As you can see, this goes both ways here. So the kidney can use CO2 and H2O to make new carbonic acid to create carbonate and then produce it. So it can either give you new bicarbonate, or it can receive extra. And it uses an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase to make this. All right, that's how the phosphate buffer system, the carbonic acid buffer system are connected in the kidney, blood, and the lungs. Now, let's look at the protein buffer systems. The protein buffer systems we have a bunch of these. There are these proteins that are really abundant in the blood and in the body, and they carry out this role of buffer systems. The thing is, proteins are made of amino acids, and amino acids, as you know, have two groups, amino and acid, and it's exactly what you think. One can play as an acid, the other one is an amino group. And remember that amino groups are NH2, which are weak bases, right? So depending on how they are protonated, you can have a buffer system by just having the protein. So we have a few buffer systems. One is the hemoglobin buffer system. The other one is the albumin buffer system, one of the most abundant proteins in the blood, right? So hemoglobin buffer system, as you can imagine, it carries the blood, right? Hemoglobin carries the blood, but look at this. Hemoglobin acts as a weak acid, right? And then oxyhemoglobin, or hemoglobin bound to oxygen, acts as a weaker acid. So we do have a reaction like this, right? Which can act as a buffer system, right? So this is how it kind of connects together, from lungs to the tissues. So this also includes the carbonic acid system. So the carbonic acid system that's outside here takes care of the CO2, but focus on the hemoglobin, right? The hemoglobin here takes this oxygen from the lungs, becomes hemoglobin O2, and then it goes into the tissues, drops the O2 and a hydrogen atom, becomes hemoglobin, comes back to the lung through the blood, right? So you have an H plus here, right? Now it actually grabs H plus, gives H plus. It grabs H plus here to become HBB, right? So you see that the reason why it's a buffer, it's acting as an acid, and you have H plus involved here. H plus is dropped off here in the lungs. So because of that, it's acting as a buffer system. And that's, again, for the protein buffer system, it's not just one protein. We have a bunch of proteins that play buffering functions in the body. So again, this is just an introduction of these systems, and hopefully I gave you an overview of how these systems work together in order to keep the pH of the blood, the cells, and the body at a very specific number, and how, when the H plus ions become too big or too low, how they act at counteracting these changes, because that is literally what's keeping us alive. But that's enough for today. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.